By the end of the 19th dynasty, Egypt has witnessed a situation of non-stability and the permission of foreigners even in the palace of the king. One of the good examples is Erso the Syrian, who managed to get to the throne and could have been one of the mercenaries which Egypt has brought at this time to stand by the Egyptian army. The ancient Near East at this period was overwhelmed by Hindu-European immigrations, some of which settled in Asia and some other in Libya. They were targeting Egypt, except for the weakness of King Merempetah. He found that he's facing the same challenge, so his only choice was to face it. It was the 5th year of his reign when the Libyan army and their allies of Hindu-European people attacked Egypt's borders, and their excuse was that Ramesses II interfered into the Libyan internal affairs in Egypt. The Egyptian army met them in the western delta on their way to Memphis and defeated them badly. The news of this battle was recorded on the walls of Habu Temple in West Luxor. The most important battle fought by the Egyptian army during the reign of King Ramses III is the 8th year battle against the Sea People. Amongst them are those who had the name El Sekret, who are the origins of Sicily's island, and the Belest, who are the origins of Palestinians, and El Shardan, who are the origins of the inhabitants of Sardinia, and El Mashawash, and others. These people invaded Khita and dominated and took over some of the cities that overlook some of the Mediterranean islands and some of the cities that overlook El Furat River. Then they headed towards Egypt with a navy and an overland army. The Egyptian army encountered them by the eastern borders and destroyed their army. The Egyptian navy intercepted and defied the navy of the Sea People during the 8th year of the reign of King Ramesses III. They defeated them so bad that the news of this battle was recorded on the walls of Habu Temple by the proud Egyptians. By that victory, Egypt was able to free itself and the countries of the ancient Near East from a great danger. These people disappeared from the scene of events and never thought again of encountering the army of Egypt. After a few years of catching breath after this vicious encounter and stand up against the Sea People, Ramesses III found himself in the 11th year of his reign, facing some of these people, which formed allies with the old enemies of Egypt, who were the Libyans, under the leadership of the Libyan leader, Meshisher. The two armies met in the western delta, where the Egyptian army won, and chased them till out of the Egyptian borders. That's how Ramesses III succeeded in terminating the Sea People Egypt in the east and the west, under the leadership. Later, he may have demonstrated the power of Egypt in Syria and Palestine, and may have reached El Furat River, which his ancestors have reached before. If King Ramses III is attributed for saving Egypt and the area of the ancient Near East from the invasion of the Sea People, and that he succeeded in returning back to Egypt some of its reverence in the states that follow the Egyptian Empire, he is also accounted for that big number of constructions which Thebes has witnessed, and other cities as well. For there is Habu Temple in West Luxor, which could be considered Karnak of the West, in exchange for the Karnak temples of East Luxor. Habu Temple is considered an example of the Egyptian architecture and art. It's also considered a rich record that tells many historical events that happened during the reign of King Ramses III. It also tells the life story of Egypt in that period with all its sides. This temple still keeps the ruins of the palace attached to it. King Ramses III has built it to rest in it during his visit to the temple to perform the rituals. It's accountable for King Ramses III, the temple he has built for Amun, among the collection of Karnak temples, and which is considered the most complete temple amongst the Karnak temples. That's in addition to his tomb in the Valley of the Kings and so many monuments he left in other areas in Egypt. It's counted against him, though, that he went too far in being easy with the priests of Amun, who became a force that feared across the country. For we see him dedicating endowments for temples and giving away many offerings and exempting priests from many obligations. From Haru's papyrus we know that the land consecrated for Amun's temples reached 10% of the cultivated land in Egypt across the country, in addition to thousands of people to serve the temples, and thousands of cattle as offerings to the god. There were also the gardens and the mines and the tributes coming from foreign countries. This leniency of the king towards the priests of Amun was the actual beginning of the domination of the priests overrunning things in the country, and later we'll see how they anticipated taking over the power and ruling, and crowned themselves as kings over Egypt. King Ramses III was a mighty king, yet his leniency and mildness towards foreigners was unprecedented before. For he had allowed foreigners to occupy some high official jobs in the palace. Moreover, we see them surrounding him in the palace and make plots to take over the ruling and transform life inside the royal palace into a life of frivolous play, after they had recruited many pretty girls who were taken as captives from wars. They have succeeded in preoccupying the king with them to turn his eyes from what's going in and out of Egypt. So we see him pictured in a Syrian tower at the entrance of Habu Temple, playing and joking with the concubines and girls as if he's in a corner of relaxation and luxury, something that we are not accustomed with concerning the kings of Egypt. The evilness of the foreign palacemen hasn't stopped at that, for we see them bringing over mercenaries, the thing which frustrated the Egyptian soldier, and we see them trying to control the economy of the country. The Egyptian people were the victims, so people could no longer have their daily earnings. So we hear about the strike of the workers in the Theban cemetery in West Luxor. They stopped working, for their share of wheat hadn't been given to them for 2 months. The workers attacked the royal granaries, especially the Ramesseum, which is the temple of King Ramses II, who ruled before. From Haru's papyrus, we learn how the Egyptians yelled, saying, "We are hungry." The high officials intervened to calm the Egyptians down, but it was clear that the king was living in his own world and private life, and that the officials and the priests, after achieving more wealth on the account of the people who were getting poorer. These strikes were a clear mark on the falling down of the 20th century and the new kingdom. But it was clear that the king was living in his own world and private. Amongst the important events recorded in Harris Papyrus is a story of the conspiracy that was plotted in the palace to eliminate King Ramesses III. It's known that, according to the multiplicity of the king's wives, sometimes each wife worked to get her son to be a successor of the throne, and later a ruler of the country. If one of the wives felt that the succession to the throne will not be the fate of her son, she would resort to conspiring on the king's life. That's what happened to King Ramesses III. One of his wives plotted his killing with the help of some foreigners in the palace and some of the high officials. We don't know from the papyrus to what extent the plot succeeded, and we don't know who is the wife in particular. Some think that it's Queen Teti, buried in one of the tombs of the Valley of the Queens in West Luxor. The investigations files mention that there were foreigners amongst the members of the court, and that some judges and policemen had spent a night together in which they drank alcohol with one of the suspects, and thus they themselves became suspects. The verdict ruled to execute one of the princes and 3 of the accused. Some others had sentences of cutting off their ears or noses. If the final days of that king had these misfortunate events of internal affairs turbulence and the sneaking of foreigners to the palace of the king and the conspiracy upon his life, but there is no doubt that King Ramesses III was one of the greatest warriors and builders of Egypt, and the last one who had succeeded in keeping the great fearful image of Egypt throughout the entire empire, which is subdued traitors to the palace of the king. He has also succeeded in blocking the attacks of the sea people, which had it succeeded, Egypt would have been lost, together with the cities of the ancient and the last one who had. After the death of King Ramesses III, came to the throne of Egypt a group of kings who bore the same name, the last of which was King Ramesses XI, with whom the 20th dynasty ended. These kings found themselves facing many grave problems which were inherited, including the economical dilemma and the internal collapse and the deep-rooted foreigners' interference, and finally the control of the priests of Hammon on all affairs of the kingdom. On the other hand, these kings were confident that they were incapable of keeping the power of Egypt over the provinces following it. So we don't know if any of these kings had sent a military campaign here or there to make these provinces feel that Egypt is still keen and watching over its possessions abroad. Corruption overwhelmed the country, and kings closed their ears of what was going on, and some of them preferred to leave the ruling to his helpers and live in their palaces in the east of Delta. The documents of this period record the thefts and the bribes and the economical fall down. Nothing was mentioned about Ramesses IV or the Fifth. As for the 6th Ramesses, we found his tomb in the Valley of the Kings, and that his name is recorded on several other monuments. As for the Ramesses from the 7th till the 9th, the collapsing has reached a level in their time that hadn't reached before that time or after. It's enough to know that the most famous robberies in the history, which is a robbery of the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, happened in the reign of King Ramesses IX. These robberies were the direct result to the corruption that prevailed in the country and to the economical tightness which the Egyptians went through, and for the rich got richer and the poor got poorer, and the court couldn't judge with justice. successors of King Ramesses III, the direct result of the internal collapsing in Egypt, both physically and psychologically, was that some people descended so low that they violated the tombs of the kings and others to steal the treasures buried in these tombs and the funerary furniture. They were assisted by the involvement of the officials on what was going on in exchange for certain bribes. They were also helped by their weak belonging to their country, which resulted from the lack of attention they got from the rulers. From the papyrus of Abbot, which is a papyrus of the tombs robbery, we learn that there was a struggle between the mayor of East Luxor and the mayor of West Luxor, where the cemeteries lie under his control. Each of them competed in defending himself and pointing his finger towards the other, looking for gaining more credit from the king's representative or minister. The investigations proved the large extent of the indifference of the officials and their involvement, which led to the robbery of all the tombs of the pharaohs of Egypt and the scattering of its mummies here and there. Only God and destiny preserved to us the tomb of King Tutankhamun, which the eyes of the thieves failed to see. If the great artistic works found in the tomb of this king pleased us and the whole world, we were sad that the tomb's possessions of the great kings and queens of Egypt were lost, like Queen Hatshepsut and King Thutmose III, and Amunhotep II, and Amunhotep III, and Horemheb, and Ramesses II, and Merenptah, and Ramesses III, and others. If these were the possessions of the least rank of Egypt's kings, who is King Tutankhamun, so how were the treasures of the tombs of these mighty pharaohs and queens?